June, NESC produced a paper called How We Value Work, the Impact of COVID-19. And one of the conclusions they drew is that COVID-19 has made good jobs better and poor jobs worse. An extremely interesting conclusion. And they have a fascinating graph at the end, which I'd be interested to know, have you seen? And it shows that the people least impacted by COVID-19 tend to be the best paid people with the best ability to work remotely and so on, and less economically affected. And the worst impacted and the least remunerated are the people that we have depended on most. And there's a lot to say about this in terms of how we have failed to actually reward those who've really carried us through and will carry us through the restrictions. But one of the most damning of all is the healthcare workers. Highest risk, and many of them lowest rewarded. And a shocking example of this, although there are multiple, nurses on the Call for Ireland put on agency contracts, unfair dismissals, sick pay don't apply. Contact tracers, as I revealed last week, supposed mistake, 0-hour contracts. We're told a few hours after I expose it, oh, that was a mistake, even though it's all over the contract. But even if it was a mistake, which it wasn't, unfair dismissals doesn't apply, sick pay don't apply. No wonder we don't have the contact tracers to actually get on top of the virus. But then another egregious example, the student nurses, who because of protest were given healthcare assistant pay in March and April, but are now working for nothing again. Thousands of student nurses working hours, effectively working as nurses, as care assistants and as students, and not getting a red cent. And indeed, the INMO suggests that now, such is the exploitation of this group of student nurses, is that the HSE doesn't bother to recruit healthcare assistants, which we desperately need, permanent direct recruitment of healthcare assistants, because they can rely on the slave student nurses who also now can't work in other work to boost their income because of COVID restrictions would mean they'd be carrying infections into the hospitals, which they are effectively holding together in many cases, but getting nothing. Now, this is absolutely unacceptable. I mean, this is fighting COVID on the cheap, and you won't defeat COVID on the cheap. And frankly, I think this is a big part of the reason we're in the mess we're in now in terms of the levels of infections, because we haven't actually recruited with proper jobs directly to the HSE, the nurses, the healthcare assistants and the other healthcare workers who are the most at threat from COVID-19 and financially are getting little or in some cases nothing. Now, are you going to do something about this and make sure these student nurses are actually paid and rewarded and deal with the issue of proper recruitment to quality jobs for the frontline workers we are depending on?
Well, first of all, in terms of the climate bill and just transition, I think the climate bill is a transformative bill. It should be welcomed by the opposition and by the Deputy MacDonald's party, Sinn Féin, although I know they have issues with climate change agenda and, in my view, have taken a negative stance in relation to it and are somewhat in denial on the issue in reality. But the just transition, we did move on the Midlands. Government provided 20 million for the first retrofit scheme, with quite a number of counties affected by the decisions in terms of the peat burning stations. And that's part of the preemptive moves that were identified in the NESC report to create alternative enterprises and employment in areas affected by climate change decisions that wouldn't have a detrimental impact on employment in a given area. In addition to that, the carbon fund that's been created from the proceeds of the carbon tax will provide fuel subsidies. Over the next decade, over 3 billion will be put aside for that. To make sure that people are not on low incomes are not disadvantaged as a result of it, and also then to deal with agriculture and deal with family or environmentally friendly farming, which I think is very important. On the education system and rapid testing and antigen testing, again I spoke with the CMO at the weekend on this, and the HECO have published their report, as you have said. NEFIT are now clinically validating that antigen tests. France is moving ahead with it. Portugal and Greece have told me when I met them when I met the Prime Ministers at the EU Council meeting that they'd been undertaking these tests for quite some time. So the view up to now has been a policy issue as to whether the whether the testing is as effective as PCR or whether it is effective at all. Now, I think we've moved on from that position, and so when the clinical validation is over, we'll be able to come back to the Deputy.